Katherine Ware. Welcome to the New Mexico Museum of Art. As some of you know, the museum turned 100 last year. And so you are sitting in one of our centennial exhibitions, Shifting Light, Photographic Perspectives. One of our centennial shows has just come down to make room for a couple of new shows that I will tell you about in a moment. And we do still have the other centennial show, Horizons, available downstairs. So I really encourage you to go and take a look when you get a chance. I wanted to alert you to two new exhibitions that are coming up and opening at the end of next week. Frederick Hammersley, To Paint Without Thinking, and Patrick Nagatani, Invented Realities. So both of those will have a public opening next Friday, which I believe is the 25th. Everyone is welcome. Please come out if you can, and if not, we'll hope to see you this summer. We have a lot of summer events happening in conjunction with the show and otherwise. And at least one of them involves ice cream. Which one? In case that's a good idea. So we don't have any ice cream today, but I do have a special treat for you. It is my pleasure to introduce the incomparable Betty Hahn. And Betty is someone, well, as you know, museums and art historians like to classify things, right? That's one of the things we do. And so Betty is considered a photographer, but she has spent most of her career elaborating on what that might mean. Some people may not see her work as being immediately photographic, so that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. And especially if anyone would like more information about her work, I would love to refer you to this catalog from 1995. And this was an exhibition that was done here by Steve Yates called Photography, or Maybe Not. Just to set the tone for things. So I'm going to just drop that on the floor. And Betty, at a time when the gelatin silver print, so the black and white photograph, was really dominating the art world, you became interested in historic photographs and in non-silver processes. And as I understand it, that happened while you were still in school. Can you tell us a little bit about that time when you were just beginning to become an artist and what drew you to some of those alternative processes?
Yeah, I was in school. I did photography along with design, graphic design and printmaking. And so when I came to photography, it was in the context of total art school. And when I got to my teacher, who was well known in the field, Henry Smith, his attitude toward photography was so open, and he himself was somewhat of an experimenter, but he was also too smart to just call work experimentation, right? He would never go for that. So you really, I was really dealing with a person who loved photography. He totally devoted himself to it. This was at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. Good art program, good teachers. So when I came out of that, I was doing things that people called alternative. I've never called anything I did anything. They had to classify me. Okay, so I'm classified as a photographer, but I've done a lot of work in printmaking. This one behind is a woodcut. I did this when I was in graduate school, and I think I did 8 of them in this class. Now the teacher, that printmaking teacher, didn't like photography imagery or photographs and whatnot, so I had a hard time. But I do remember somebody in the class they saw these things on the wall, the guy said, I don't get this. These pictures are corny. And, I just smiled and I said, yeah. I mean, it's a family snapshot. Everybody looks alike. Isn't that the point? Everybody's look alike, and they are corny. So, but I guess at that time I was glad to be classified as a photographer. In this particular picture, there were no photo processes used, just looking at the little snapshot and drawing it onto a board and then cutting it. So, nothing photosensitive on that, no chemistry.
So that's interesting that you got interested in what we now talk about as vernacular photography and appropriation in the 1960s. This piece is from 1965. Do you have any recollection of what pushed you in that direction? And maybe talk a little bit about your use of the alternative processes themselves.
Well, I came to it through my design teacher, and he was a Bauhaus product, educated in Europe. And my own photo teacher also really influenced by the Bauhaus because his teacher was Moholy-Nagy. Anyway, those guys, both of them very open to doing things with the photo image. So I came to it, I was forced to take the photo class. I didn't want to, I was into graphic design. And, well, teachers, they get real bossy sometimes, so I went, okay, I'll take it. And then, my friend and colleague, Patrick Nagatani, always used the word magic. The only time I used it, or really felt like it, was the first time I put a piece of photo paper in a tray and it came up in that tray, and watching that in the darkroom, that to me was, But I was always attracted to the way photography rendered images. It was the light and shadow, and the way things were predictable, sometimes predictably beautiful, sometimes predictably corny. Like, see how people's eyes, they all go black. And yet I can recognize this as my mother, my father, myself, and my little brother. And yet there's not a lot of facial information, but just those little cuts of wood and the black, that corny part of photography that I love so much.
So do you enjoy the making part? Because I think in some ways, some of the processes you've used, or some of the ways you've approached art making is, for lack of a better word, complicated. You've made a wood cut, you're mixing chemicals for gum bichromate, etc. Is that more about those are the best ways to achieve your vision, or is it also that you enjoy some level of the craftsmanship aspect?
Yeah, I think I do enjoy it. It's torturous, takes a lot of time. I guess I appreciate how much time people can spend on something. That's a really old tradition. And what was the other question? Back to that. I think that the process, or various processes, would interest me depending on how they looked. So I wanted this look, the black and white snapshot look, but just making a big black and white photograph, well, as you said, it was appropriated. Somebody in my family took it, so I didn't take it. I took it over, and yes, I did that. And see, in graduate school, you can do a lot of things without people questioning you. By the time I moved to Rochester, yikes, boy, those guys, everybody in that city knew photography, and what they would say about my work, that's not photography. Ooh.
Yeah. So they were more hardcore, holding the line, well, so tell us about being in Rochester. You went there to work, and you ended up getting more involved in the photography community there. So you had the chance to look at the rich historic collection at the Eastman House, and you also got involved with the folks at Visual Studies Workshop. Now, they were pretty iconoclastic, weren't they?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Rochester was good for that. All kinds of photography. The Eastman House had a number of people there kind of holding the fort. They wouldn't let everything go Ansel Adams. They were open to things, certainly Nathan Lyons was. And yeah, so that was the community that protected me from it was actually from the RIT system, which is where I was teaching. So I was teaching with the enemy.
We love you, Therese.
Rochester, RIT.
And you did go and look at things in their collection, as I understand it. Now, so Betty has 4 works on view in this show, and we are going to talk about them a little bit, even though people who are looking at the video will not get a chance to see those in person. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was the piece in the show called Soft Daguerreotypes. And that seemed to come out of that real interest in photographic objects. But I'm also really interested in how that mood or what was going on in Rochester with bookmaking, with people's interest in Xeroxing images, and with a rise in interest in other forms of non-high art, like fabric, working with fabric and so forth. How did all those things come together? Was that kind of part of how you ended up making those pieces?
Yeah, I think living in Rochester, living near the George Eastman House Museum of Photography made a real impression on me. And in the beginning, photography was very open. People tried everything.
In the very beginning.
Yes, in the very beginning. And then the dogma guys kind of started to slowly take over the things that led to that's not photography, this perfect black and white image. So you've got Kodak to thank for that, and RIT was Kodak's little baby because they supported it with equipment and photo paper and film. So those guys wanted to hold down people like me because
it was a company town.
Yeah, it was a company town. So, but the people at the museum, friends of mine, it was kind of easy to ignore that at RIT. They said some funny things about what you should and should not do with photography. And one guy, I think it was Czechoslovakia, and he told me I needed to take his course. And he taught mountain photography. There are no mountains in Rochester. But he did say when there is snow and things look like mountains, it really helps to take a knitting needle with you and stick a flower on the point of it and then stick that in the landscape for your composition.
So the fabric art's very important.
Yes. So in the beginning, photography really did, cyanotypes were made into piano covers with fringe. And
by whom?
Anonymous was a woman, right?
Right.
What do you think?
That's right.
And some of these other processes were on display in the historic exhibitions.
Yes.
I particularly like daguerreotypes because they appeared and then they disappeared right in your hand. You just have to get the light right. And so my approach to the daguerreotypes was all soft and fabricy. probably the influence of Klaus Oldenburg or something. But those artists in the 60s were more important to me than photographers in the 60s. They seem to be doing the same thing year after year after year. So I really liked the introduction of pop art into New York. Anyway, mine are done by Xerox. A friend of mine, Joel Schwartz, had an original Xerox machine which came in two parts, a camera and a little cabinet that held trichloroethylene fumes, really awful stuff. But you take a picture, you get your plate sensitized electrically, and I put that silver fabric on it. I'm looking at the now, but I put the silver fabric into that, and the trichloroethylene fumes were so strong that they start to dissolve the fabric.
Oh my gosh.
So I had to work really fast, get the electric dust image on that silver fabric, put it in the chemical cabinet for the shortest possible time. So there was a lot of trial and error and pass and fail trying to get that without ruining it. Yeah, but and then once I got on silver fabric, I could make a fabric case for it, and I did quite a few of those. But again, it's a crazy working with your hands, a labor-intensive process, and making the cases for them. That's not photographic. That's just plain labor-intensive sewing. Okay.
So one question I had about these soft daguerreotypes is the subject matter you decided to portray. So I would have imagined you going off to the Eastman House, looking at all these portraits from the mid-1800s to the late 1800s, and putting a picture of a person. That's kind of the typical, the iconic daguerreotype, right? It's a very stiffly posed couple of people. And you made pictures of weeds, I think.
Got it, weeds, yeah.
What's up with that?
Well, of course, that's almost all. It seems like 99% of daguerreotypes are about people. They're straight-on portraits, right? Okay, that would mean I would have to get my friends to pose for this in old-fashioned clothing.
Oh?
But what I liked were the very rare daguerreotypes where somebody took a picture of a landscape. And yeah, I've got weeds in the water and reflections. So I thought that was a little 20th century and a little 19th century. But yes, I knew those daguerreotypes were rare, and now they are very valuable too.
That's great. That's helpful to hear you say that. And it makes it more of a collision, or more of an update in a way of the idea of the daguerreotype, not only physically but conceptually as well. I'm really glad you mentioned pop art. I almost brought that up, but it's better when you say that's what I was looking at, that's what I was thinking about. That's really wonderful.
Yeah, if you look for inspiration, that's where I got the inspiration from those artists, yes.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too to hear you talk about the RIT climate and to think that there was that really strong black and white tradition in town, and then there was this tremendous innovation with people like Dean Nevels and Nathan and Joan Lyons.
Going on at the same time, yeah.
Right.
Going on at the same time.
That's pretty powerful.
And when I began teaching there, they had a class that took their students a whole year through nothing but materials and processes.
That sounds like the Bauhaus again.
Black and white.
Oh,
yeah.
black, okay.
And then there was another course where they photographed an egg for 10 weeks. Lighting. How to do lighting, yeah. And so that's a bunch of stuff I didn't know. When I got there, I did learn more about traditional photography, de-logging curves and stuff like that.
I think I missed that day.
Density curve of the film. Yeah, they had 20 densitometers there to measure the negatives.
Yeah, it's a really different approach, but it's craftsmanship in a different way. In some ways, you know, that level of meticulousness in constructing the dark blueprints.
Yeah, but it got to be rather religious in nature. They were really, really trying to protect that from renegades.
Right. She's a rebel. Well, maybe we should set the stage just for a minute too, and just think, well, this is in the 1960s and the 1970s, and there was pop art, there was silk screen and collaging, and it was a really dynamic time, and certainly a time for women artists when they were bringing forward some of these less traditional art forms, like that involve sewing and little books and things like that. So those pieces seem to fit really firmly into that. Well, we do want to have some time for questions, but let's just take another moment. One of the other pieces that Betty has on view is called Dark Peony, from I think about 1985. Do you want to talk just a little bit about your interest in the flower as a subject?
Yeah, I've done these radical switches of subject matter and processes, and the reason I could do that, because nobody was paying attention to what I was doing. There was nobody to stop me from doing that. So I did it. I had an idea. I did it. When I was teaching at RIT, those students, I got the radical students in my class, the renegades, those people who wanted to go out on a limb photographically. But those kids were great because they knew all the rules, the densitometers, the zone system. They knew how to make a perfect black and white photograph. And I liked that because to see them do that, you appreciated the. But when it came to changing off of that, there were so many people who had their feet nailed to the floor. They weren't moving from that position, but students did, and they would try all kinds of things. Pinhole cameras, they'd hear about something, they would try it, and I love that. So I had the right students in my classes at RIT, and I appreciated the fact that they would drop a process and then switch and do something else. So I thought their attitude was inspiring. And, you know, some of these I can say, well, there's only 8 of these big woodcuts. And with the soft daguerreotypes, I think there's probably 9 or 10. And then I stopped. And with that big gold peony back there, what I learned from other things was I liked that size better. I liked that silvery quality. So with the peony, I bought silver paint or gold paint and put it on the background of a Van Dyke print. And so I was glad that I knew how to make negatives that size. I did. It's probably helpful to be at RIT. But those things were great to be able to solve paper problems, take a brush and cover a large sheet of drawing paper with a photo solution. And the flowers, as far as the subject matter goes, Japanese. Well, I was very influenced by the Japanese paintings of the Edo period. And I also liked their favorite flowers, peonies, chrysanthemums, iris. So I stuck to photographing my favorite flowers with a view camera, by the way, because one of my students at RIT sold me this gorgeous 4x5 view camera for I think $100. He was giving that up forever. That happened at RIT too. But anyway, I could make these big, nice negatives and make cyanotypes or Van Dykes in this kind of what I saw as a traditional Japanese style. But it's another one of these century jumping things.
That's really helpful to me too. I thought that this is the wrong track entirely. I thought that maybe you were choosing them as one of the most banal subject matters known to mankind. You know, picture of a flower and, you know, women in flowers and all that, and sort of recasting them or imbuing them with something different. But it was really that you loved them and you were thinking of that other work.
And the other thing is I had been photographing flowers in gardens since a child. I mean, since my first camera, I was out there, you know, in a garden or photographing my grandmother's flowers. So that was something that seemed so normal to me, and I was glad for the Japanese influence, because the question becomes what flowers and why do they look that way? So.
Well, I'm just going to ask one last quick question, and that is, how do you feel about what's going on now in photography? Do you feel vindicated by it? It's maybe a time of incredible pluralism, or is it not as much of interest to you?
Well, I mean, I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't like the pluralism. I love it. I love that people
You can be a hypocrite.
take up the you know, the materials and processes, whatever, of photography now, and they do amazing things with it. And that wasn't always the case. So sure, I love the fact that there's all kinds of different things being done.
Yes. Well, let's give Betty a hand, and then we'll take some questions. Thank you so much. Who is wondering? who feels we did not cover all the important topics and has a question?
Oh, addressed plate. That's in the,
All right,
the
so
photograph on the plate.
that's right. The fourth piece by Betty in the exhibition is a ceramic plate with an image of the Lone Ranger on it. And do you want to tell people about that project?
Yeah, I was invited to do that project by the Santa Fe Museum. It was a fundraiser many years ago. And a number of artists in New Mexico were asked, "You want to do this?" And this was right around the time they were also asking artists to do painted ponies for it. So I definitely was not interested in painting a pony, but the dinner plates, I thought, yeah, that's good, I'll do that. And we, all of us who agreed to do it, went out to a ceramics studio here, outside, out in the hills. And we stayed there and we did these plates, and everybody did, I don't know, 5 or 6 plates, maybe up to 10 plates.
I don't remember.
But you could put anything you wanted on them. And I wanted the Lone Ranger on mine, and I made a little picture of it so that it looked like something that I had done before. I didn't want to do something that had no relationship to my work. So I did the Lone Ranger, and I was also totally enchanted. It's the land of enchantment. I was enchanted by the skies and the light here and the sunsets. So every one of my plates has a different take on the light and landscape behind. And I also painted the back of every plate.
So it's the Lone Ranger. There actually is a pony. Just saying.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Your Lone Ranger series that you did for Tamarin, that have the they're like kind of cyanide looking, and then you've attached silver stars. Were those done around the same time? The ones that are in
the first Lone Ranger I did at a workshop in New Hampshire. I took that big negative with me, and my goal was to make a different variation every day, because I was there for a month, and I thought, that's it. Wake up, go to the studio, take that negative, print it, and then do something interesting to the print. And the cyanotype was one of those And then I had the silver stars, or they had them there or something. Anyway, I got the silver
Because
stars.
they're in the collection at UNM now. Some of those are.
Yeah, some of those are. Santa Fe Museum has one. Yeah, New Mexico, the University of New Mexico has one. Yeah, several people have those, but that was another appropriated image. That one was in the public domain, so there was no photographer to fight with. It was an advertising, it was a publicity still. And I had a whole pile of publicity stills, but I liked that one the best because they looked like they were cut out and just cardboard there. And I loved that odd look.
Can you clear your throat for a minute?
It's just so dry.
It's a dry heat. Well, some of you I know have been taking tours through the galleries and may have grappled a little bit with how to talk about Betty's work. Any questions from you for her about how to talk about her work with other people? Wow, okay. I figured they'd be helping you with questions. Anything else you wanted to say, Betty, that we didn't quite get to?
Can't think of it. I said a bunch of stuff.
I was pretty happy with that. Well, we really appreciate you all being here. Next month, I believe we're going to be talking with Megan Jacobs in front of this same wall, talking about images of family. This room, the theme of this room is culture and identity, so we're going to be talking about photographs in relationship to culture and identity and the issue of family, which is also the subject of her work. So we invite you to join us for that. You can always check the website for our events. And I forgot to mention that in this show is also being amplified by artists working online. We have about 20 New Mexico artists submitting work to the show via Instagram, the museum's Instagram site. So we really invite you to follow us on Instagram at New Mexico Art Museum, or to share that with people you know who might be interested. We have, as I say, I think it's 19 different artists who are submitting work, one at a time. So thanks so much for being here. You did have something else to say.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Betty, this is our librarian, Rebecca.
Hey.